So I am really excited to welcome you all here this evening. This virtual event is for the purpose of celebrating what all of our amazing volunteers, all of you volunteers who are joining us tonight, accomplished this year. And it was really an incredible year, kind of a record year for the Colorado Pika Project, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's great to have you all. And we just really want to kind of highlight what you all accomplished with your contributions and your time. So before we get into that, I just wanted to go over some nuts and bolts about this webinar. So everybody is automatically muted, and that's because we don't want to hear a ton of background noise from everybody's dogs and kids and husbands and whatever is going on at your house this evening. But we would love to hear your questions and comments. And so if you would like to ask questions or give us comments, you can either type those into the chat box and we'll answer them there, or we'll read them out and answer them to the group. Or you can raise your hand. So down at the bottom, if you click on participants and then raise hand, like Alex just did, then you can raise your hand and we'll try to see that and call on you, and then we can kind of unmute you so that you can ask a question. So if you prefer to verbally ask your questions, we can do that. We'll have time for questions at the end of each presentation. We're going to have a few great presentations this evening, and then we'll have a big chunk of time at the end of the webinar when folks can ask questions. I wanted to let you all know that we are recording this webinar and all of your questions. If there's something that you said or that you didn't want to be recorded, let us know and we can edit it out. But we're doing that because there are a lot of volunteers who just weren't available this evening or for the in-person celebration that we had earlier this week, and they would like to hear the results too. And so we're going to be recording this and putting it online for folks. And then if you're running into technical issues, we'll try to help you with those. You can email us at staff@pikapartners.org, and we'll see if we can work those out. It's often pretty difficult to do that remotely. And so if we aren't able to resolve your technical issues, just know that the celebration is being recorded and you'll have another chance to watch it on your own time online. So that's kind of nuts and bolts. So let's go ahead and do a round of introductions so you know who everyone who's going to be speaking here tonight is. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if I can share everybody's faces. Did that work? Get all the panelists for tonight. So Alex and Leanne and Chris, let's each just introduce ourselves, and I'll start, and Alex will unmute you guys so you can speak when it's time.
Oh, yeah.
So my name is Megan Mueller. I am a conservation biologist with Rocky Mountain Wild, and I'm the co-director of the Colorado Pika Project.
And my name is Alex Wells. I'm the community science coordinator at Denver Zoo, and I am the other co-director of this project. And Chris and Leanne, I believe that you're able to unmute yourselves. So I'll leave that to you.
I can go next, I guess. All right, cool. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here tonight and looking forward to the presentations. I'm Leanne Beltes with the Forest Service. I'm the district ranger for Eagle Holy Cross. And so I think Jen Prusy will be on a little later. So I work with her, and yeah, just looking forward. But glad to meet everyone here tonight. And I know I'm speaking to a brilliant group of people because you've figured out how to volunteer for a project that lets you be in beautiful places working with Pika. So thank you. Good to be here.
Well, great. I'm Chris Ray, and I'm the scientific advisor, or one scientific advisor for the Colorado Pika Project. And I'm just thrilled with what you guys have accomplished this year and looking forward to showing you what we're doing with some of your data.
And then we're going to have a couple of folks here who aren't here at the moment. So one is Peter Billiman. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Connecticut, and he's going to be doing a presentation on some really interesting recent research that he did in Montana and Idaho. And he actually recorded that for us as a video, and then we're going to try to pull him in afterwards so that he can answer questions in person. So he'll be here later. And then we have a great graduate student at University of Colorado named Ivory Peralta, and she's working with Chris Ray, and she's actually going to be analyzing some of the data that our volunteers collected for her PhD with Chris. And she wanted to be here tonight, but wasn't able to make it. And so Chris is gonna do her presentation for her, but I just wanted to mention her. And then one last nuts and bolts thing, Chris mentioned that her video and audio might have a tiny bit of a delay, but it's okay once she gets going. So we'll just kind of be patient with that. And I think that's kind of, oh, and then Jen Pruce is our really amazing biologist from the White River National Forest, Eagle Holy Cross District, who works with Leanne and who is our main connection with the Forest Service on this project. And she'll be joining us a little later this evening. So that's the folks who will be presenting. And then I guess I'll just go ahead and, so I'm gonna go back to the presentation and then just kind of talk about the plan for the evening and what we'll be doing. So let me go ahead and do that. You got, Alex, do you see the screen?
All good.
Okay, so the plan for this evening is I'm going to start by going over some highlights from the 2021 season of the Colorado Pika Project. And then Chris Ray is going to do a presentation called Pika Yak, which you'll love, and I'll leave it a secret what that means. Chris can tell you when it's time. And then Chris will also be doing a presentation for Ivory Peralta on some of the results of some analysis that Ivory is doing with the volunteer data that you've collected in Rocky Mountain National Park. And then we'll play a video where Peter Billiman is going to talk about factors influencing pika distributional shifts in abundance. And then we'll save the best thing for last, which is a bunch of thank yous and fun shout outs to our volunteers. And then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you have questions during my presentation or anyone else's, you can go ahead and just drop them in the chat box, and we'll have a little time after each presentation to answer questions, and then we'll have a bunch of time at the end if you didn't happen to think of your question while the presentation was happening. So I want to just start with a land acknowledgement. The Colorado Pika Project takes place on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and 7 Council Fires peoples. And it was also an important site for several other indigenous tribes. And so I just wanted to affirm indigenous knowledge, history, experiences by offering this acknowledgement. So I want to start with a huge thank you to all of the volunteers this year. Let's do a round of applause. Give yourselves a round of applause. We trained 78 new volunteers this year and 76 returning volunteers. It was amazing to have so many new people, and then also to have so many great volunteers who came back and returned and keep coming back year after year to help us collect data. And we had 150 volunteers who conducted surveys, which is really a record for the project and just pretty amazing. So I can't thank you all enough for your contributions. And Alex, I think I saw somebody raise their hand. Do you want to see?
David did, but David, we'll get to your question at the end of the presentation.
Great. Volunteers contributed 1,640 hours of being trained and planning out their hikes and driving to sites and hiking and doing surveys and then entering all their data online, which is just pretty incredible. And I really love these photos that Megan Hetzel and Abby Hughes submitted to us. They were actually submitted as part of the little photo contest that we're doing. And the one where she's crawling through the trees here just kind of made me laugh out loud, because I think that really kind of summarizes how the volunteer experience can be. And I've actually, I think, been in that same set of bushes. It's very unpleasant. But then you also get the beautiful hike up to the site and you get to get out and see wildlife. And so anyway, it's hard work, and we're really grateful for all of that time. And it's just so much more time than we would be able to put in on our own to do pika surveys and figure out what's going on with pikas in the region. So thanks again for that. This year, as you all know, we switched over to having you all enter your data using survey 123. And part of the reason that we did that is because it enables us to do cool things with allowing you guys to explore the results. And so we made this dashboard that we're actually going to be sharing with you all so that you can kind of explore what you accomplished and the things that we're learning about the different sites and whether or not pikas are present or absent and things like that on your own. And so I'm going to switch over now to that dashboard here. Oh, that didn't work. Are you guys seeing my screen still? And then are you seeing the dashboard, Alex?
Yep. Great.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of use this dashboard to show you some of the results for this season. And in the process, I'll kind of try to show you a little bit about how you can explore different things with this dashboard. So, and when we send it out online to folks via email, we'll send out instructions with it that kind of tell you how to use it. But you can see that there's a map here in the middle, and it's got different layers on it. And you can actually go into this box here and turn off the different layers. So I'm going to turn off the pika presence absence layer so we can just look at the surveys. And so what you're seeing here is the red polygon up at the top is our study area in Rocky Mountain National Park. The white is our study area in the White River National Forest and in the Front Range. And then the blue is our study area in the White River National Forest. And then the dots and triangles that you see are the surveys that you guys did this year in 2021. And so you can see the red dots are surveys in Rocky Mountain National Park. The white triangles are surveys in our Front Range study area. And then the blue dots are surveys in the White River National Forest. And so let's say you surveyed a site and you wanted to look at what the results were for that site. You could go ahead and go up here and pick one of the sites. And then other sites will kind of disappear from the map so that you can find it. And you can double click to zoom in on it. And then when you click on it, you can actually see all of your data that you entered here by scrolling up and down. And then if you use this bar at the top, you can see the 3 surveys that happened at that site this year and what data is present. So that's kind of fun. You can explore that, and you'll be able to do that kind of over time. So you could look at your favorite site and how pika presence and absence has changed over time. So that's one way to look at it. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. You could also turn on the layer that shows you pika presence and absence and turn off these other layers. So now what you're seeing here is the results for presence and absence at the sites. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. but you can, zoom in and look at different sites. And if you wanted to look at presence absence at a certain site, you could select it the same way I just did and be able to zoom in on that site. So I'll show you a little bit more about how that works in a minute. So anyway, this is kind of a fun way to show you all what we did over the year. And I'm just going to turn this presence absence off and turn these other ones back on for a second. There we go. So let's just talk about some of the great things you did this year. So we're going to start out with the number of people who surveyed sites and the number of sites surveyed and the number of total surveys for each area, which you can see over here on the right in blue. So in Rocky Mountain National Park, we had 56 surveyors complete surveys, and that was 51 volunteers and 5 staff and partners. In the White River, we had 74 people complete surveys, 59 volunteers and 15 staff and partners. And then in the Front Range, we had 49 volunteers. And actually in the Front Range, we didn't have any staff and partners do any surveys because we didn't need to, because our Front Range volunteers are amazing. And altogether, we had 171 people complete surveys. That was 154 volunteers and 17 staff and partners. So now let's go ahead and look at what you guys accomplished in terms of surveying sites. So you surveyed 46 sites in Rocky Mountain National Park, 53 sites in the White River National Forest, and 31 sites along the Front Range. And altogether, you surveyed 130 sites, which is way more sites than we have ever surveyed in the past. So that's pretty amazing. And then let's look at the number of surveys. So you guys all know that we tried to get sites surveyed at least twice each year. So we like to get them surveyed by more than one volunteer if possible. And you guys did 68 surveys in Rocky Mountain National Park, which is 544 hours of time. You did 89 surveys in the White River National Forest, which is 712 hours of time. You did 48 surveys along the Front Range, which is 384 hours of your time. And you did 205 surveys altogether, which is 1,640 hours. So that is really amazing. And I just kind of can't believe it. So we really appreciate that. So now let's look a little bit at what we're seeing in the data that you have submitted so far. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the surveys off, and then go ahead and take a presence and absence. Let's see here. So if you look over on the left in green, these are the results for what we're finding for pika presence and absence at the sites. And I want to note that all of these numbers are preliminary because we haven't done quality control on the data yet. So just take them with a little bit of a grain of salt and know that they'll change a little bit as we do quality control on the data. So in Rocky Mountain National Park, there were 33 sites where pikas were present. In the White River National Forest, there were 46 sites where pikas were present, and in the Front Range, there were 23 sites. And then let's look at absences. And I'm going to go ahead and put these on the map too. Let's see here. Oops. Okay, so what you're seeing now on this map is sites that are yellow or orange, and those are sites where pikas are absent. They were absent in 2021, and there is evidence of either past pika sign at those sites or historic records of pika occurrence from our surveys or surveys done by other people like Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And these results are also at the scale of a patch. So they're places where pikas were absent, not just in the plot, but also in the whole patch. And so we had in Rocky Mountain National Park 11 sites where pikas were absent, where we have some evidence that they were present at least sometimes in the past. In the White River National Forest, we have 8 sites that are absent, where we have some evidence that pikas were present in the past. And in the Front Range, we have 2 sites where pikas are absent, where they may, were present, or there's some evidence they were present in the past. And so, that's interesting because, that may mean that pikas are being lost from some of these sites, or, they were there in the past and we're not finding them there now. And our staff went out and did really intensive patch scale absence surveys at some of these sites, just to see if, to do a really careful search to see how much old pika sign we could find, and to see if we could find any sign of pika presence. And those surveys were pretty interesting, and made me feel a little bit concerned about some of the sites. So like one example is these Chapman Sites in the White River National Forest. I'm trying to zoom in on where they are so you can see them. See here. Maybe over here. I'm not finding them, so I won't waste time doing that. But there are 2 sites there near the Chapman campground, kind of up the Frying Pan River. And we surveyed them pretty intensively. And what we were finding was huge piles of old pika scat, but you had to dig down beneath kind of a pretty, 1 or 2 inch thick layer of leaves and dirt and debris to get to the pika scat. And then on top of the dirt and debris, there was pack rat scat, but not any recent sign of pika, no scat, no new scat, no old hay piles, no new hay piles. And so it seems like pika have been, were pretty abundant at those sites in the past, and they are absent now and probably have been absent for a little while. So, that's potentially some cause for concern. That said, we've only done those intensive surveys at a kind of small number of sites, and these sites could potentially get recolonized by pikas, and there may be other pikas kind of in patches nearby. So, anyway, there are also some sites, a small number of sites that just have no sign of pika, and we've never found any sign of pika at them. So they probably just have never been pika habitat. In Rocky Mountain National Park, there are 6 sites like that. In the White River National Forest, there are 4, and in the Front Range, there are 7. So that's kind of what we're seeing in terms of presence absence. And then let me just put the presence layer back up on this map so that you can see the rest of it. So now, what you're looking at here is the sites that are purple or blue are sites where pikas are present in 2021 or have been present in recent years. And then the sites that are orange or red are sites where pikas are absent. The red are sites where they're absent with no sign, and then the yellow are sites where they're absent with past sign. So you can see there's still a lot more sites where pikas are present than where they're absent. And then the last thing I wanted to show you on the dashboard is, in addition to all the work our volunteers did this year, staff was able to ground truth and mark 23 new sites, 20 in Rocky Mountain National Park and 3 in the White River National Forest. And so that means that we're really close to having all of the sites ground truthed and marked, which is really great. And then we've also placed 80 temperature data loggers, which are devices that you can leave out for several years, and they will monitor the temperature under the talus in our plots at really regular intervals, and we can collect that data. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But those are our results for this year. And we'll be sending you guys all out this dashboard so you can play with it and look more closely at the results if you're interested in doing that. So now I'm gonna go back to the presentation here. All right. Is that working, Alex? Are you seeing that?
Yes. Oh, wait, no, sorry. No, we're still looking at the dashboard.
You are, okay. Try this again. How about now?
All good.
Oops, okay. All right, so I just wanted to highlight a couple other really great things that happened this year. We had a really wonderful volunteer named Christy Odom, who also happens to be a Nikon ambassador and a really talented photographer. And she came out to our volunteer trainings and out to see pikas and took a bunch of photographs and ended up successfully pitching a story about pikas and the Colorado Pika Project to National Geographic. And so that was really wonderful because it's, you know, getting the story about pikas and what we're trying to do for them here in Colorado with the Colorado Pika Project out to a really broad audience. So that was pretty exciting, and let us know if you didn't see that and you'd like to read it. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about our 2022 plans. So we have a long list of improvements that we need to make to Survey 123 based on you guys' feedback from trying to submit data using Survey 123 for the first time. I think it worked fairly well, but there are definitely some kinks that still need to be worked out. And then we're still kind of waiting on lawyers to approve our privacy policies so that we can release the app that you guys will be able to use to record Pika surveys when you're out recreating anywhere in Colorado. And so we're a little frustrated with how long it takes lawyers to do that. But on the bright side, it'll be a great privacy policy, so you guys will be well protected and not have to worry about that when you're using the app. So that will definitely be out next summer. I think we're really close to having it approved now. Another thing that we're gonna do next year is, you know, I think you all know we're pretty concerned about rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus and the potential impacts of that disease on pikas in Colorado. And we are planning to try to set up a rapid response team of volunteers who could go collect carcasses if we have volunteers that see carcasses in the park. And the reason for that is this year we did actually have volunteers that found dead pikas or found pikas that were exhibiting potential symptoms of rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, but you can't confirm that unless you can send someone out to collect the carcass. And the way that we do that now is okay. We notify the Park Service, we notify Chris Ray, and hopefully either Chris Ray or one of the Park Service staff is in town and can rush out there and collect the carcass. But you know, sometimes they're out of town, sometimes they're, you know, busy and can't make it up as quickly as they would like to. And so it would be really wonderful if we had some volunteers who were trained to be able to do that too, who could rapidly go out and collect carcasses. So I think this is more relevant for volunteers who live near the park, but if you're interested in that, let us know. And then I mentioned that we put temperature data loggers at a lot of the sites this year, and we're going to put more out next year, and we're going to have you guys help us collect that data. So you'll be able to take your phone out and just kind of use your phone to pull the data off of the temperature data loggers that are in the talus. It does it through Bluetooth. So that'll be an exciting thing to have. It's a little bit more work for you to do during the survey, but it's really useful information because, you know, it tells us the temperature that pikas are experiencing under the talus and how that temperature is changing over time. since we were able to do so much of the ground truthing and marking of sites and placing temperature data loggers this year, we're going to have to spend a lot less time in the field. So that means that Alex and I will be much more available to help you out with your questions and answer your emails during the field season. And we'll also be putting our focus on some other ways to kind of improve the volunteer experience and working on, you know, analyzing the data and doing things with the results a bit more. So that's exciting. And we also would really love to hear your ideas about what we can improve for the field season. We'll be sending out a formal survey at the end of the year, but if you've got ideas right now, we'd love to hear them, and you can just toss them in the chat box and we'll read them. And as the volunteers who have been around for a long time know, we actually do read all that feedback and make improvements based on you guys' ideas. And we've done a lot of neat things with this project that we wouldn't have thought of, except that volunteers had ideas and, you know, we implemented them. So be sure to tell us your ideas and give us your feedback, good or bad. Okay, and then this is, oops, sorry, I went too far ahead. So this is the last thing, and then we're gonna turn it over to our great guest presenters. But Rocky Mountain Wild and the Colorado Pika Project are starting a new program. We've really, for a long time, wanted to find a way to not only study pikas and try to find out whether or not they're declining and try to come up with good strategies to manage their habitat to make them more resilient to climate change, but also, you know, while we're doing that, to find another way for folks to take action to conserve pikas. And the thing we always get hung up on is that the best thing that we can do for pikas is to draw down carbon. And so we finally found a really exciting and creative way to do that. So what we're going to be doing is recruiting folks, volunteers, members of our community, corporations, all kinds of people, and asking them to offset their carbon by donating to the Colorado Pika Project. And then we're going to use a large proportion of that money to work with the Southern Plains Land Trust, which is an organization that is buying big chunks of prairie out on the Southern Plains of Colorado to serve as a wildlife refuge and also to draw down carbon, because the prairie is a really strong carbon sink, and these lands are slated either for development, housing development, or for agricultural development. And so when you buy them up, you keep them able to sequester carbon into the future. So that's pretty exciting. And at the same time, it'll be sequestering carbon and helping draw down emissions in Colorado, which is good for pikas. And I think, you know, we all know we need kind of big global systemic action on climate change to draw down emissions. But I think, you know, these smaller kind of collective actions where a lot of people get together and try to come up with innovative solutions to draw down carbon are also really important. And so that's what we're hoping to do. And you guys are the first people to hear about the program. It'll get launched over the next few months, and you'll have an opportunity to donate to it or to recruit folks you know to donate to it. So that's pretty exciting. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Chris. So Chris, you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yes, I will now try to share my screen. And I'd like to thank you all again from us here at University of Colorado for all of the wonderful data that you have collected. And I'm going to be giving a presentation for my graduate student, Irie Peralta, who just started analyzing some of the data from Rocky Mountain National Park. We're very excited to be at this point where there's enough data to start to model occupancy. Irie is in the upper left-hand side of my screen right now. I hope that everyone can see that. And she's from Mexico, and she's been working with me for a few years, and now she's a PhD student at CU, and I'm so excited because she's an amazing person and will be doing great things with your data. So this is her presentation, and she wanted to remind you all why she would be modeling pika occupancy. When you look at where animals are on a landscape, it helps you understand their habitat relationships, and it also helps managers manage them. And it gives us a chance to reduce bias in our understanding of where things are, what kind of resources they use, by estimating the detection rate. So sometimes animals are where we don't think they are, and your data, when you're going to sites more than once, it's so that we can estimate this detection rate and learn a whole lot more about the data. On the right-hand side of the screen, maybe some of you are familiar with this projection for Rocky Mountain National Park, where we see pika habitat potentially disappearing in this century. And one of the things that we're so excited to learn from your data is whether or not there's any evidence that this is actually happening. So that's where we're going with that. Irie wanted to show some of her hard work. All these little zeros and ones on the right-hand side are your data, and she is learning how to model it, how to account for imperfect detection in these models. And she wanted to remind you that it's so hard to figure these things out if we don't have at least a couple of surveys per plot per season. And I was really happy to see in the dashboard that this year, not only did you actually survey more plots in Rocky Mountain than there have been during the entire time that the data has been amassing for Irie to do her analysis, but you also surveyed about half those plots twice, which is exactly what she was hoping. So everything's looking good there. Her preliminary results over from 2017 to 2020, 44 plots were visited in Rocky Mountain National Park in 110 surveys. So some plots were visited, year after year after year. Not very many were visited multiple times within a year, but there were some. And so, so she's able to do that modeling. We found that temperature during the survey, the occupancy at the site was related to temperature during the survey. So when it was warmer, it was less likely that pikas were found there. And that could be due to actually pikas are less common in warmer sites, or it could be that they don't show up, they're not available for detection so much on warmer days. And we'll be trying to figure that out over the next couple of years. And the other thing that was quite notable was that pikas were more commonly occupying sites that had deeper talus, so deeper crevices. And you're out there trying to estimate those crevice depths, and thank you very much for that. We did see an effect of crevice depth on the occupancy of these sites. So those are the preliminary results, and we're going to have some more of those by December when this report is due to Rocky Mountain National Park. And thanks again, Irie and everyone else. And now I need to stop sharing this screen and share something else, because I need to ask you to continue to collect pika scat. So I'm going to share another presentation to give you some reason, again, to, okay, I have to wait for my, there, and I'm gonna do a slideshow. Yeah, so this is the pika yak for just a few minutes. I'm gonna talk poop again. Please bear with me. Here's a pika with a cigar in its mouth, and this cigar is marmot scat. And we all know that rabbits, pikas, and hares run their food through twice. The first time they poop, it's kind of like Vegemite, they eat it down. And then the second time they poop, it's a familiar rabbit pellet that you guys have been collecting for all kinds of analyses. And that's, you know, an interesting strategy that they have. They also collect marmot scat, and although I have never seen pikas eating it, we certainly suspect that they get some sort of nutrients from this scat because they do collect it. There could be other things going on, however, and I've always wanted to study it. And it turns out that something surprising happened this summer that instigated several of my colleagues and I getting together, and we're going to start studying this a little bit more. Here's a marmot in pika land. Here's a pika communing with a marmot. Pikas tend to have their hay piles right next to marmot dens. On the left-hand side of your screen, there's actually a pika on its hay pile in the upper left, and then there's a marmot den right below that pika hay pile. And when you see this, the pikas usually do better. They tend to survive longer, and those are the territories that are occupied more. So there's some benefit to being around marmots. Here's a marmot den in a wildlife camera. So that marmot doesn't know that it's getting its picture taken as it comes out hungry in the morning. And then it goes back later in the morning with some grass in its mouth, and it's going back into the den. And then later that afternoon, we catch the pika going into the same exact hole. It's kind of different lighting, but it's exactly the same hole the marmot went into. And the pika disappears. This little rump is disappearing into that hole. This is what I see a lot when I put cameras on marmot dens. Pikas go in there and use them. I noticed that sometimes the pikas have their babies in the marmot den, so they treat it like a nursery. They're probably benefiting from the fact that marmots can scare away the major predators, that the weasels. So really cool. Pikas are benefiting from marmots, but they're also collecting their scat, and that is kind of strange. So still wondering why they're doing that. What could be the benefit of having this animal's poop? When pikas do have poop in their, collect the poop, the marmot poop and stick it in their hay piles, they don't seem to eat it, because if you go back in the spring, you see the dregs of what's left from a pika hay pile, and you're looking at that right now. You're seeing just a few little dry golden grass stems, and then a whole bunch of marmot scat. So the marmot scat wasn't eaten, it's still just sitting there. So I always thought it might have some sort of microbial purpose in the hay pile. Maybe it helps, maybe it has microbes that eat mold and mildews or something, and keeps the pika hay from getting composting, which would be good. But this summer, I saw this paper. I'm going to read the title: Surviving Winter on the Tibetan Plateau. Pikas suppress energy demands and exploit yak feces to survive the winter. They're exploiting yak feces on the Tibetan Plateau. Here's a yak. Yaks are amazing animals that do all kinds of things for us, even though they have these incredible horns. Carry big loads for us. These two yaks were in the Himalaya, but they're all over the Tibetan Plateau as well. And we use yaks for their labor, and we also use yak scat. So this again is in the high Himalaya, where people collect the yak patties and they dry them and they use them as fuel to burn in their wood stoves. It works really well. It does not smell bad. It's just the thing. But what these people out on the Tibetan Plateau found is that pikas are using yaks as well. So they studied a place where there's high yak density and one where there's low yak density. And that was what it looked like in the summer. This is what it looks like in the winter in these two places. And then they looked and they found that pikas were eating the yak poop. They got some videos of it, which you can't really tell for sure that they're eating the yak poop. So then they went and looked at the DNA in these pika poops, and they found that in pika poop, they found yak DNA. And in yak poop, they didn't find yak DNA for the most part. Mainly pikas had yak DNA in them, and sheep didn't have yak DNA in them, and goats didn't have yak DNA in them. So the pikas are nibbling on the yak poop, whereas nobody else really is. And it's not just contaminating plants that they're eating, they're actually eating it. Here they found, they looked at stomach contents, and here I'm saying pikas with yak tummy, meaning they have some yak poop in their tummy, were more common in places where yak poop was more dense on the ground. And they also looked at what we call the microbiota. You know, in our gut, we have all these all these organisms that are exploiting us and helping us. And when you look at this, every species has its own microbiota. There's some overlap between species, especially when they occur close together. But what they found was that in the summertime, if you look at the biota in the pika poop and the biota in the yak poop, in the summertime, they're not particularly strongly related. They're related, but not really tightly. But in the winter, the biota are really tightly related. So the taxa, the biota that are in pika poop are really similar to the ones in the yak poop. And so that meant that what's happening is pikas are eating yak poop more in the winter because it has more calories and it's fueling their survival during the winter. So they're put together a pretty tight case that pikas are eating yak poop and it's doing them good out on the Tibetan Plateau, which means I better look for whether or not they're actually eating marmot scat here. And it's all tied to climate. So in the winter is when the pikas really needed this supplement of the yak poop. And they figured out how much energy it takes for a pika to survive the winter by, well, they killed a bunch of pikas and they skinned them and they stuck their skins on little metal decoys basically, and looked at how much energy it takes to keep something like that warm when you have that kind of fur. And I'm not gonna be doing that. What I'm gonna be doing is looking at a lot of pika poop, and hopefully you guys will help us collect it. And we'll compare pika scat and marmot scat and see whether or not they are ingesting this stuff and doing amazing things with it, which is a very unusual thing. This is a pika in Mongolia on the edge of the Gobi Desert. And you can see here that there's not a lot of vegetation. There's a plant there that I hope grows faster than the pika can eat it. There's maybe a few plants in the background, but there are pikas here. And the other thing that's in the foreground all around that plant is a whole lot of poop. There's poop from all kinds of ungulates, all kinds of grazing animals leave their poop as they pass by. And I think this little pika is probably depending on some of that. So the next time you see a cute pika carrying flowers and everything, know that the story might be a lot more interesting than that. And that's where I'll leave you at that, and with another big thanks for all you do to support our research. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Chris, do you have time to do questions? Okay, does anybody have?
Yes, it turns out I do.
Okay, great. Does anybody have questions for Chris? If you do, type them in the chat or raise your hand.
And if you can't ask them now, then maybe we can ask Chris at the end of the webinar. Cool. Oh, we have one. All right, so that's. Come on.
You want me to read it?
Yes, please.
So David Ernst is thanking us all, and then he also says a fellow pika patroller had mentioned during the training video she had seen that showed a pika snuggling up against a marmot in a burrow. Any idea where I could see it? Is this common? I think that might have been me telling a joke, but I speculate that maybe they're doing that in the winter to stay warm. Chris, that's not something we've ever observed, is it?
Right. So it would be possible, maybe the BBC can do this. They can get a camera, snake down into a marmot burrow and monitor it while the marmots are in hibernation, and it'd be pretty cool to see what the pikas are doing. Joe Varner recently got a video of a pika's hay pile, and a marmot was going in there and stealing the hay and leaving with it. And that sounds horrible, but maybe the marmot, they usually eat vegetation, right off the plant. They don't store vegetation for themselves necessarily. They do make nests, however. So imagine the marmot was stealing the hay and just making a nest. Then the pika could go down there in the winter and eat it anyway. So I'm not sure that, obviously pikas pikas like to live by marmots. So it can't be a big problem that marmots are always stealing pika hay in a way that it's a total loss. That can't be the case, or it wouldn't happen anymore. So yeah, lots of questions about what happens with pikas and marmots, including another question I have is if they are snuggling up with the marmot fur in the middle of the winter, what about those ectoparasites? I mean, marmots are crawling with lice and fleas and everything, and you'd think they'd want to go on the nice warm pikas, and that wouldn't be so good for pikas either. So a lot of things to try to figure out.
We've got a couple more questions. So a couple different folks, Mary and Steve and Craig, asked about if we're collecting pika poop, should we collect marmot poop too? Should we add that to what we have the volunteers collect?
Yeah, anybody who's interested in doing that can contact me. It would be super awesome if you could collect a little bit of both. We still need to hammer out what the protocol would be for collecting the marmot scat to make it easy for everyone and useful. But yeah, that's something that I would welcome. I also see, how many scat samples do you feel is necessary to attain the necessary data? And do you have a time frame in mind for how long it will take? Yeah, well, things in the research world always take longer than we want. But how many scat samples? It sort of depends on the project. We always just need some in order to keep track of genetics over time. There'll be changes in the demography, the density of pikas end up showing up in the genetics, and we need to be able to study that over time. Looking at things like whether or not pikas and marmots share microbiome, that can take just a very few samples. But if you want to study the dynamics of that over time, then you need more samples to understand, how things are over here versus over here, and whether or not those are statistically significantly different. So it really depends.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Chris? I'm not seeing any, so maybe we should go ahead and.
Yeah, let's do Peter's presentation.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Peter Billiman, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Connecticut. He is in Connecticut. He was not able to be with us on Monday when we did our in-person celebration, and so we just had him record his presentation, and so we're going to play that recording for you right now, and then afterwards Peter should be on this call to answer any questions that you have. It's a really interesting presentation, so I expect there to be questions. Have them ready. Now just give me 5 seconds while I set up that video. All right. I'm on Zoom. All right. If the audio can't be heard, say so in the chat and I'll figure it out.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Peter Billiman, and I'm going to be talking today about some of our recently published work on American pikas up in the Northern Rockies. So think Montana and Idaho. Let me just share my screen here. So the title of this talk is the drivers of distributional shifts of American pikas at their range core up in the Northern Rockies. This work was part of my master's research up at Montana State University. However, now I'm actually over on the East Coast at the University of Connecticut doing my PhD. However, this work was just published last month, and so I wanted to share it with you guys. So why do we study pikas? You guys know why we study pikas, but we know, of course, they're cute. They're very highly detectable, and so they like to be seen and heard. But also what we learn about pikas, managers can really use this information to understand how other species are responding to climate change as well. So two of the questions I'm going to focus on for this talk, we address 2 billion different questions in the paper, but I'm just going to focus on 2 here tonight. And those are, have upslope retractions occurred in the Northern Rockies yet due to climate change? And if so, by how much? How far have they shifted upslope? And then number two, basically what is responsible for these shifts upslope? Is it temperature related? Is it maybe precipitation related? Is it related to ecologically available water, so humidity and things like that? Or are these distributional shifts maybe affected by non-climatic factors? So cattle grazing, is that having a negative effect on pikas here and forcing them to move up higher? So what we did was we went out and surveyed here. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we collected all this data. And in the field, we did collect these other data. So we collected information on whether or not the site had grazing or the habitat size, things like that. And then we used PRISM, which basically is interpolated climate data from weather stations for summer and winter metrics. So we looked at summer heat stress, things like that, humidity. We looked at long-term heat stress, precipitation, things like that. So we looked at all these different factors related to heat and cold stress, as well as how they might influence the vegetation that pikas are consuming. I don't need to go over this with you guys necessarily, but just to talk about quickly the types of pika evidence that we find on the landscape. So if pikas are there, we know that they're there because we're going to see them, or we're going to hear them potentially, or we might find their current hay piles. And so these big green hay piles that have lots of vegetation in them. All of these signs tell us that pikas are currently there. However, pikas are one of the most unique species because for most animals, we can't tell that they used to be there decades ago. Think about maybe elk, for example. How do we know that an elk used to use a certain habitat 50 years ago? Unless we find like an antler or a body, we don't know that. However, with pikas, they're really cool because we can see that. They do leave behind, for example, on the left-hand side, these old hay piles that last for decades. We also find old fecal pellets, and then old fecal pellets in old hay piles. And so these evidences last on the landscape for decades to centuries even. They've carbon dated these going back, I believe, into like the 1800s. And so pikas are really neat because they do leave behind these long-term evidences that don't degrade super quickly. So for this study, we looked at essentially the range core of the species. We looked at Montana and Idaho, because this region is very, very understudied. There hadn't been any research yet on pikas in any of the 4 mountain ranges that we're working in. And ironically, these are also the 2 states where pikas are not listed as species of conservation concern. Pikas are listed in every other state that they occupy, except for Montana and Idaho. And that's just because they don't have any data yet on how pikas are doing in the states. And so we wanted to help the managers fill that gap, kind of. Also, this region does host a lot of low elevation talus and mid elevation talus and high elevation talus. And so we have these large gradients of habitat that we can survey. And so getting into things, again, this gray area now is the pika range. And so New Mexico, Colorado. Notice how, again, we are in the range core, the range center of the species. And so we focus primarily on 4 mountain ranges: Beaverheads, the Lemhi Range, which is completely in Idaho, the Italian Peaks, and the Tobacco Roots. These 2 span the Montana-Idaho border, the Italian Peaks and Beaverheads, which is also the Continental Divide. Taking a closer look just at the Tobacco Root Mountains here, these black lines represent watersheds that we surveyed. And so each black line represents 2 different watersheds, one on the east and one on the west. So it's surveyed from the low elevations down to the valley edge, all the way up to the high elevations. You can see that here as well. So low elevation all the way up to the high elevations in the white. We surveyed patches. We surveyed 12 talus patches spanning that entire gradient from low to high. So lots and lots and lots of hiking, typically off trail. Just to show you kind of the extent of the surveying, this is just one mountain range. This is Tobacco Roots again. This shows all the sites that we surveyed in that mountain range. And so over the 2 years, in total, we surveyed 760 different talus patches, which is quite extensive. Very good coverage of these 4 mountain ranges. So this is just showing the Transect Design. So low elevation, this is around 5,000 feet down here, all the way up to about 10,000 feet up at the highest. Each of these polygons represents a different talus patch or habitat. So this is technically a little video. It's a little jumpy at the beginning. I apologize. And so you can see how hot and dry it is down here. There's not even trees. It's just grass. And so as we begin to start up, we find evidence of old hay piles, old fecal pellets, things like that. And so we have these sites that are extirpated or locally extinct. And moving up to green, which is now still currently occupied. So pikas are still occupying all these green patches. They're doing quite well. There's also a bit more talus habitat up at high elevations, as you can see. But overall, notice just here that we do have these large gradients from low to high elevation, and we surveyed the habitats spanning that gradient. Alrighty. So what do these mountain ranges actually look like on the ground? This is the Beaverheads. It's a very wet and cold mountain range. This is in June, so there's still snow, but in general, this mountain range is very, very wet and it never really gets that hot. The Italian Peaks, as you can see, it's pretty grassy. It's grassy and sagebrushy. There's also aspens, quite a bit of aspen in this range. And the Lemhi range, which is primarily limestone, so we actually found a lot of coral fossils and things like that. This is one of the hotter and drier mountain ranges that we worked in. And then lastly, we have the Tobacco Root Mountains. This is kind of your typical, basically Colorado mountain range. This is, you can see these conifer forests at the mid elevations, and at the high elevations, we see the alpine grasslands or alpine tundra. And then the lower elevations, which are not in this photo, of course, are going to be sagebrush and grasslands and things like that. So what we found was that occupancy, so the number of sites basically that Pika still occupied, was much lower than we expected. We expected to be between maybe 90 and 100% of patches being occupied, which is what we find in the Tetons, for example. The Tetons occupancy is near 100%. Pikas are everywhere. But we found that about 35 to 39% of patches were already extinct, depending on which mountain range we're talking about. And so occupancy was much lower than we expected. So what kind of factors were associated with these extinctions? First and foremost, it appeared to be acute heat stress having a negative effect on populations. So the number of days, basically, did you have 1 day or did you have 100 days above 70 degrees Fahrenheit? That is one of the thresholds for pikas. That temperatures above that, they really don't like. And so number one, first and foremost, acute heat stress had a negative effect on occupancy. It increased your probability of extinction. Number two was the number of home ranges or the habitat size. How big was your talus patch? And so the bigger the patch, the more likely you were to remain occupied. However, if you had a small patch, you were more likely to go extinct through time. And third, we have actual evapotranspiration, which had a positive effect. And so if you think about these greener vegetation, forbs and things like that, these higher elevations, evapotranspiration had a positive effect on occupancy. So it was good for pikas, higher quality vegetation, things like that. But mostly acute heat stress and the number of home ranges appeared in 6 of the top 7 models, suggesting that these 2 factors were the most important in determining pika occupancy and extinctions. Extirpated sites on average had 11 more days above that lethal threshold. And then they were also 1.43 degrees warmer in the summertime than the occupied sites. And so we do see the strong signal that temperature is having a negative effect on pikas, primarily in the summer. So what about for upslope retraction now? Each of these bars represents a different watershed. And so the lower elevation represents the lowest elevation of talus in that watershed. So for example, in this one, we surveyed from 1,500 meters all the way up to about 2,400 meters. In this watershed now, we surveyed from about 1,700 meters up to 2,500 meters. So each of these bars represents a different watershed in a different mountain range clumped up. So Beaverheads, Italian Peaks, Lemhis, and the Tobacco Roots. So importantly, did we see upslope retractions or not? What we found was quite surprising. We did indeed find quite widespread elevational range retractions. Pikas were no longer occupying the lower elevational limits in 44 of the 64 watersheds. So 70% of our watersheds already had extinctions at the low elevations. One watershed actually went completely extinct. This guy right here in the Lemhis, no pikas anywhere anymore. Again, that's 70% of watersheds retracted upslope. The mean retraction, so the average size of these orange bars is about 277 meters. And then the mean minimum elevation of occupancy, so what's the lower limit that pikas occupy, shifted upslope from 2,100 meters up to 2,300 meters. If my explanation was pretty terrible and you're not following that for some reason, which is fair, here's a little diagram here. So as we go from low elevation to high elevation, we have all these different sites that we surveyed. The lower elevation sites being extirpated represent that orange bar of elevation. And then where pikas still occupy is this gray dots, and that's going to be your occupied. So overall, the take-home message here is that pikas are not doing as well as we expected them to here in the Northern Rocky Mountains. What does this look like on the landscape? So this is kind of a cool little visual I made in, I think, Google Earth. This red line here represents the minimum elevation that pikas used to occupy. So pikas used to extend from down here all the way up to the peaks, but now pikas only occupy currently from the green upwards. And so all the way from the red to the green, pikas have gone extinct from, and then everywhere from the green upwards, pikas still occupy. So as you can see, they've lost about half of their elevational span in this mountain range. They used to occupy about 4,000 feet of elevational span, and now they only occupy about 2,000 feet, the highest 2,000 feet. So it's kind of a doom and gloom picture. That's not the goal here necessarily, but pikas in certain areas are shifting upslope quite rapidly. So as part of this research, I just want to thank everybody who's worked with us, all of our funders, the National Science Foundation and the American Alpine Club down in Colorado, the American Society of Mammalogists, Northwestern Scientific Association, all these folks helped fund this research, and then my amazing field technicians. Global Change Biology, the journal that this was just published in, actually liked one of our photos and put it on the cover, so it's always fun to have pikas shown to the greater audience. And I'm going to leave it on this slide, and I'm going to open it up to questions. This is kind of just the take-home messages here. I think the biggest thing to note is that Colorado doesn't quite yet have a statewide effort to identify where pikas used to be. And that would be crucial information moving forward to help managers really figure out where we might want to allocate resources. We don't have a lot of methods yet for quote unquote saving these populations. However, it is important to know how far they've shifted upslope, where they've shifted upslope, to what extent. And then we can use that information to potentially triage management efforts in the future. And because we don't have any really concrete ways to, again, save populations, we really just have to think about slowing down climate change in the bigger picture, think about our emissions and things like that. And so until we can figure out what to do, we really like to emphasize that. And so from there, I will open it up for questions. And thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Alex,
And as you can see, Peter is now actually here. It's not just a recording of him. And so we'll give a few minutes for him to answer any questions that come up.
so if you've got a question, type it in the chat box.
Or raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask it.
Not seeing any questions yet. Peter, this is a question Chris asked at the in-person celebration, which I think people might be interested in, which is, do you know how long ago pikas disappeared from those sites? Like, have you been able to age the scat to find out if it's recent?
Yeah. So at all of our sites where we found just historical evidence, we were able to actually collect in coin envelopes, fecal pellets. And so we were able to collect all of those. We have a couple hundred packets of them. However, we have not dated them quite yet. We're hoping that kind of these methods for carbon dating are going to get a little bit more precise. However, to run these samples the way that other samples have been ran already on these types of things, they run about $100 per sample, and so they're quite expensive. So unfortunately, we have not yet. However, anecdotally, this is just kind of what we see on the landscape. As we get further down the watershed or to lower elevations, we see that the evidence is much more degraded. There's less evidence, maybe fewer old hay piles, things like that. We see that these populations, I should say these talus patches closer to where the species currently are still occupying. So these mid elevations that are no longer occupied do have much more evidence. They have many more old hay piles, things like that, suggesting that occupancy may be more recent. However, other than that, we've not done any carbon dating, unfortunately, yet. We hope to in the future. It's just going to be pretty expensive. So I hope that answers it.
Yeah, it does. And it looks like we've got a couple other questions. Jen from the Forest Service is asking if you ended up looking into grazing as well, and if you did, what did you find?
Yeah, we did actually. It's tough to quantify grazing, the effects of it. And so what we did was we judged whether or not there was evidence of cow dung basically on the landscape, which is pretty easy to find, or if we saw evidence of recent grazing, so kind of grass being mowed down, things like that. And so if we found any evidence of recent grazing or current grazing, we documented that as a categorical variable. Surprisingly, though, we did not find any support for that being correlated with extirpation risk. With cattle just being as robust as they are, they're typically going to stay in these lower elevation areas anyways. They're not going to go into this mountainous rocky terrain. However, throughout all of our models that we included grazing in, we did not find any support for grazing being an important factor. It has proven to be an important factor in areas like the Great Basin, which might be more vegetation limited. We did actually have a few areas like super up high, probably like 10, 11,000 feet, where we actually did see cattle actively grazing, which surprised us. But for the most part, they are restricted to these lower elevation areas simply because of topography. But again, there was just no support, surprisingly, in our model suites. So.
Okay, great. And then Leanne with the Forest Service is asking, have you extrapolated the time frame for when the pikas may be totally extirpated from the Idaho-Montana ranges you studied? In other words, at this rate, do they have until 2040, 2050, et cetera?
Yeah, we actually haven't. This would be a great next step in this research now that we kind of understand the environmental factors associated with these extirpations, especially this acute heat stress metric, these number of days above 26 degrees, their upper lethal threshold. That would be fairly easy to model on the landscape. We can downscale these large global climate projections and get into that. There is a little bit of complexity with it because there are these really strong areas of decoupling, these areas that are going to remain cold for a long time, even though the macroclimate has warmed up. These areas such as near streams, areas that have super deep talus that are going to remain cold for much longer. It would be pretty difficult to model that on this big of a scale. However, just essentially looking at acute heat stress and chronic heat stress, that would be fairly simple to model on this landscape. And so we haven't done it yet. We're hoping that somebody might be interested in that moving into the future, especially managers, because that would give them a good idea of kind of the thresholds they should be looking at in these years moving forward and under different emissions scenarios. So yeah, hoping to examine that because it's been done in a few other areas. So it'd be great to look at.
And then Susan and David, who are volunteers, are asking what the site orientation of the sites you surveyed was. Were they mostly north facing or south facing? Or?
Yeah, so most of our watersheds ran, well, we wanted them to run east to west. Watersheds never run straight basically though. And so we ended up looking at a compass figure or a compass map. And so you essentially plot the density of patches, or I guess how many patches you have facing different cardinal directions. And what we found was we actually had pretty equal sampling across all directions. That may differ by elevation. However, we did find that we had extremely equal coverage, I guess I would say, which was convenient. But again, in some of our models, we did include aspect and solar insolation, things like that, to try to assess whether or not aspect actually had an effect. And again, that surprisingly did not have a strong effect on this eco-regional scale. It likely does have an effect though at local scales. So an individual patch that is south-facing is going to experience much warmer conditions than a similar patch facing northwards in the same area. And so at a local scale, it likely does have a strong effect. But we did not find or identify a strong impact of it at this eco-regional scale across 760 patches.
Okay, and then Sophia, who's one of our volunteers, is asking, do you know if similar studies are being carried out in other countries where there are pikas? Are they losing their lower elevation habitat elsewhere?
Oh, that's a good question. I know, so there's another species of pika up in Alaska and Canada, which is the collared pika. I know they're beginning to assess their vulnerability, and they are considered a vulnerable species in the face of climate change. They generally have less habitat and things like that, but they're finding the better quality habitat pikas are basically saturating that. And so the distributions haven't been changed drastically quite yet. In Asia, there are a lot of different species of pikas. I believe there was a recent study came out looking at habitat connectivity and the effect that climate change may have on the species over there, but they didn't find any sort of historical movements upslope. So the pikas in Asia, a lot of them occupy these steppe regions. So think about maybe comparable to our grasslands that have sagebrush in them around Colorado and Montana and Idaho. Their pikas are oftentimes ground dwelling, or they're living in rock walls that humans have made for their cattle and things like that. And so pikas over there are not oftentimes restricted to just talus. There's quite a few species that occupy the Himalayas, for example, as well. And we just know that conditions there are not extremely hot compared to some other regions of the world. So as of right now, I don't believe that there are any other studies. There are studies kind of assessing other factors. Can they deal with hypoxia and low oxygen environments in the Himalayas and things like that. But as far as I know, there haven't been any distributional studies quite yet on pikas elsewhere. And so that seems like a major knowledge gap that should be addressed. However, accessibility to some of these regions is really difficult. The Himalayas are not exactly notorious for being accessible by car or hiking or anything like that. But the methods that we use are certainly could be applied elsewhere and would be great to look at for other closely related organisms like Asiatic pikas. So.
Well, it looks like the questions have kind of wrapped up. And so we might have more at the end, but I think maybe we should go ahead and move on to the last little piece of evening's things, which is the fun shout outs to some volunteers and things like that. So
yeah. Peter, if you're able to stick around to see if there's more questions at the end, that'd be great. But yeah, thank you for answering those.
Yeah, and thanks for the great presentation.
Yeah,
glad to help.
All right, I will share my screen once again. Here we go. Okay, cool. All right. As Megan said earlier, this is the fun part of the evening, or well, very subjective, but it's the part of the evening where we get to just celebrate our volunteers and emphasize the efforts of some specific people who really went above and beyond this year and not just tell you statistics. Not that those aren't fun too. So let's do shout outs. And before we get to specific volunteers, I want to start with everyone. Thank you everyone so much for your work this year. We appreciate it so much. It's a banner year, a record-breaking year for the Colorado Pika Project. We could not do this research without you, and we are so grateful. And I know that our volunteers do not do this with the idea of any kind of payment or prize. I mean, access to Rocky Mountain National Park when you're volunteering is a perk, but I know everyone's doing it for like concerned about climate change or wanting to hike with a purpose or all that. But we do want to show our appreciation with some Colorado Pika Project swag. So we have new stickers and we have these nice hats. They're not in yet. This photo is photoshopped, but that is what they'll look like in theory. So if you made it out for a Pika survey this year, you are entitled to a hat. You're entitled to a sticker, and we'll be reaching out with more information about that in the next few weeks, I expect. All right, and then I also want to take this moment to briefly hand it off to two of our representatives from the Forest Service and also to speak on behalf of the National Park Service. Lisa Barron, who is our partner at Rocky Mountain National Park, was able to make it for our event on Monday. However, she can't be here tonight, and so I just want to say on behalf of Rocky Mountain National Park, thank you so much, volunteers. The park, pika are a key species for Rocky Mountain National Park, and they wouldn't be able to collect data on them without you all. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jed Bruce, wildlife biologist in the Eagle Holy Cross District of White River National Forest.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for volunteering for this incredible project and really contributing to this vital research. as Alex mentioned, we just couldn't do this work without you. And also, I really hope that you guys are having a blast while you're out there hiking in this gorgeous alpine country, and hope you return again next summer. I also want to say thanks to our amazing partners, Megan and Alex. You guys have been fantastic to work with, and it's been really cool to see you connect with our local communities across the forest. And thank you, Dr. Chris Ray, as well as Peter Billiman and all the other researchers that are contributing to this effort. It's just been super cool to see this project evolve. So thank you.
And Leanne, if you'd like to say something as well, you are welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, Jen pretty much covered it, but already looking forward to next year. I hope everyone comes back, and this is the kind of thing that the long-term importance of doing this type of work will just continue to build on itself and speak more and more to the urgency of, as we all know, I mean, the situation, not just for this species, but what it means more broadly, taking place. And so I hope everyone feels really good or just empowered about being a part of that, and just how directly and immediately significant your time and contributions are to something like this. And I really enjoyed the presentations tonight, really interesting, and I learned a ton. So thank you, everyone.
Awesome. All right, with that, I will take us back to presentation. Let me know if you can't see presentation. All right, Megan's giving me a thumbs up. We're good. All right, so thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to take a moment to highlight a few specific people who really just went above and beyond this year. And one of the ways that going above and beyond is reflected is by who conducted the most surveys in each of our study areas. Obviously, we are so happy if you do a single survey up in Rocky Mountain National Park or the Front Range, but I mean, it's helpful if you do more than one. And so I want to recognize Garnet Moore, who did 3 surveys up on Trail Ridge Road. For the folks who did the most surveys in each study area, we actually have a little prize. So I'll be reaching out to Garnet, and all the other volunteers can take note of that and feel competitive for next year if you want, if you're so inclined. Like I said, a single survey is so valuable for us. Then most surveys in White River National Forest, we've got Kathy Traga and her son, Jacob Tao. Kathy was actually at our event on Monday, but her and Jacob made it out to 2 sites in White River, I think Makoa and, oh, I'm not gonna remember the other one, another backpacking range, I don't remember. But then they also submitted an opportunistic observation from, I think, the Indian Peaks. So thank you, Kathy and Jacob, much appreciated. Now, for the Front Range and Front Range project, that's our longest running effort. We've been doing it for a decade now, and appropriately, we have a tie, and the volunteers who surveyed the most sites for each of these teams, they're longtime volunteers who've been with us for years. So thank you so much, Mary, Steve, Luke, for making it up to so many sites. Mary and Steve made it up to Lake Agnes, Mount Chapin, Ruby Creek, Trap Lake. Luke was at Bighorn Peak, Crystal, Hitchens Gulch, Ouzel Lake, so many different places. Thank you both so much for your service this year and for all the years in the past as well. I'll be reaching out to both of you. I know Mary and Steve are on this call, so we're very grateful to you too. All right. Let's see. Next up, we have our most interesting observations of 2021. I've got 2 of these. First off, we've got Cheryl Winter and Erica Churgan, who observed this bat in Talus on the way up to, I think by Nose Lake, on the way up to our Spearhead site in Rocky Mountain National Park. Bats are hard to ID from photos, but we're really interested in observations of bats because, I mean, Megan is actually putting together through Rocky Mountain Wild a community science project that's focused on bats and where they roost. And so this information is really useful, especially with bats being a group of species with some level of conservation concern these days with white nose syndrome. So thank you, Cheryl and Erica. We also have Maureen O'Brien, who actually observed, I believe it wasn't a dead pika, but an injured, no, it was a pika with its back legs apparently paralyzed that Maureen later found dead, is my understanding. And this is really, really significant because of rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, as Megan was talking about at the start of the presentation. We're really concerned about that as a threat and a new threat to pikas across their range and here in Colorado. And not only did Maureen observe this and tell us about it really quickly, but she also went up to the same spot up by Rock Cut on Trail Ridge Road every single week for the rest of the summer and sat out for an hour, observed what she saw, and wrote up a little report for us at the end of the summer. So that's, if that isn't going above and beyond, then I do not know what is. So thank you so much, Maureen. You're awesome. All right, now I actually want to, this is not in a presentation, but it's a separate video. I want to give some recognition to David and Susan King, because at the start of this summer, we didn't know where we were going to host our training for Rocky Mountain National Park because our former spot we couldn't go to anymore. And David and Susan gave us an excellent recommendation. 3, 2. That had many pikas, many cute marmots. And so at the end of that training, we actually recorded a little note for the two of them. So I'm going to play it right now. 2, 1. Thanks, David, Susan. 3. Okay. I hope everyone heard that. Good. All right. Now back in here. Moving on. All right. Now I want to recognize Nancy Wiedman, who wasn't actually able to survey too many sites this summer, but she has been volunteering with us, with her husband, Paul Asper, for several years for the Pike Project in the White River National Forest. And that's fantastic. But I also want to emphasize that Nancy was essential this summer for helping us troubleshoot some problems with our Survey 123 data entry system. So anyone who entered data this summer, you have Nancy to thank for making that experience exponentially better. She noticed things that Megan and I did not even think of. So thank you, Nancy, for being so fastidious in your attention to detail. Yeah. All right. Special thank you to Christina Odom. As Megan mentioned earlier, she is the reason that we are in National Geographic on their website this summer. And that's, I mean, more coverage than this project has ever received in the past. And it's been so incredible. And I'm personally pretty excited about it. And also it's worth noting that most of the photos in this presentation are by Christy or Lauren Buckles. And so, I mean, we're so happy to have Christy involved with this project. Look at that pika, so beautiful. All right, next up, we hosted a little photo contest recently, and we wanted to announce the winner right here. And thank you to everyone who submitted a photo. We were really impressed with everyone, but especially by Amy Johnson, who submitted this beautiful photo of a pika, just glowing, radiant pika. Thank you so much, Amy. We have a little, we actually have a print of one of Christy's photos that we have for you as a gift, a prize for winning the contest. So thank you so much for your submission, and we definitely hope to do another contest next summer. All right, now, Allie, I know that you're on this call. We want to recognize Allie Chapman, who was effectively our intern this summer, and also Chris's intern to some extent. And Allie is an outstanding field technician. We would, as Megan said earlier, I think we made it out to 23, we ground truth 23 sites, and we did a lot more than that, set up like 80 data loggers. That would not have been remotely possible without Allie. She was stupendous. So thank you, Allie, so much. We really appreciate you. All right, and last, but definitely not least, I want to recognize Patrick Crowl, who he's a staff member at the zoo who's been involved with this project for 5 years, and he is not leaving the zoo, but he's transitioning into helping out with a different conservation project. Our work, Denver Zoo's work at Daniels Park, just south of Denver. He's going to use his skills in restoration and his background in trail building for that. And we're going to be really sad to miss him. He's been awesome at trainings. He's an incredible teacher. And so thank you, Patrick, for your time with this project. And I believe that those are all of our shout outs. Thank you everyone for volunteering. And I think with that, we can open it up for questions. Megan, am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so. I just wanted to second that thank you to everyone. I mentioned this at the in-person event, so I wanted to mention it here too. In addition to, really making this project a huge success, all of you Pika volunteers really make me happy. You make me feel very hopeful about the future of the planet and wildlife and wild places in Colorado. And so I am really, really appreciative of that too, in addition to all of your contributions of time for the project and for Pikas and for helping us address climate change.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, now let's take questions.
Yeah, and Megan and I are happy to stick around all night long to answer questions, but that is the end of our scheduled programming. I see that we do actually already have one question, which is from Ellie Carroll, and she is asking, have any of your study sites burned since you started your work?
Yeah.
The answer is yeah. Megan, do you know the exact number?
I don't know the exact number, but we had a pretty significant number that burned in the big wildfires in Rocky Mountain National Park last year. And we've also had some in the White River National Forest that burned.
Yeah. I think that our White River ones, we first surveyed the sites after they had been burned.
Yeah, that's true.
But the ones in, I know there's at least, I'm positive there's at least two, one Front Range site and one Rocky Mountain National Park site that are located near Grand Lake that we had collected data at before they caught on fire. But there's probably, but we haven't looked specifically at that, like how the burn area overlaps. I just know that there's several more that are within the large shape files of where those wildfires were, the large extents.
And the one on the White River was interesting, even though we surveyed it after, I think more than a year after the fire that happened there. It was, you could sort of tell that there was quite a bit of pass sign. And at first we kind of thought there wouldn't be any pikas left there because it was a pretty intense fire, and I think it burned all the vegetation, so they would have had to survive in 1 year without much to eat or recolonize it. But we did actually hear a couple pikas in that patch, and the vegetation has come back. So when we were there, it was like, fireweed and stuff that was over our knees. So kind of looked like, there was a lot of vegetation for the pikas that made it through the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bad site if you really want to see pikas, but it's a really beautiful spot up on Basalt Mountain. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe give another minute or two for questions.
Yeah. And Alex, I wanted to mention, if any of our presenters can't stay all night, just feel free to, feel free to drop off when you need to. And
yes, I hope that's.
There are questions, but we're not requiring you to do that. So.
Especially Peter, who's on East Coast time. Yeah, and then as well, I'd mentioned that we're gonna, bye people, that we're going to post this on social media, is the plan. We're going to distribute it to the public, and you'll be able to watch this in the future. And so if you have any more questions that occur to you when you watch it a week from now, because you'll want to rehash all this information, then you can always reach Megan and me over email. All right. We actually have another question from Dallas. do you two have a particularly favorite memory from this year? Megan, you go first.
I think my favorite time in the field this year was when we went into kind of the backside of Rocky Mountain National Park, kind of in the general area where the fire was, and the road was closed, and it was kind of right at the start of hunting season, and we saw more wildlife back there than I think I've ever seen in Colorado in 3 days. Like, I don't remember the numbers now. It was like 11 moose and 35 bighorn sheep and like 60 elk and tons of picos.
Martin.
Yeah, so that was pretty amazing. Alex, do you have a favorite?
That probably would also be mine. I would also mention no, that's dang it, Megan. I will say that I always really enjoy, I got to do some surveys up in the Maroon Bells or the Maroon Snow Mouse Wilderness again this year, which is kind of my home section of the White River National Forest, and it is always really magical to get to work in the place where you kind of grew up and spent your free time hiking. So that always feels really magical.
And I always love the trainings because it's just like all these really smart, incredible people you get to hang out with.
I would also, maybe like my favorite / least favorite moment is actually our first training when it looked like it was going to be 40 degrees and raining for the entire time. But we decided like there was just enough of a window that we were going to push through it. And then we showed up at our designated parking area, and there was a half marathon being run out of the exact same spot, and that it was starting at the exact same time that our trainees were getting there. And somehow the training still went without a hitch, and it was great, but that was a lot of stress. David Ernst asks about wood rats and pack rats. Did we observe any this year, I suppose? And how do they interact with / affect pikas?
That's a good question. So we don't really know, but they do live in talus, and they do eat vegetation. And I think, maybe Chris knows. I think that one theory is that they could compete with each other, and pack rats might take over habitat at lower elevations when pikas are gone. But Chris probably has a better answer than I do, and she's still here. So.
Yeah, I might add that I've actually done some analysis of larger data sets across the Western US to see whether there was an association or a competition perhaps between pikas and pikas and wood rats. And I didn't find any evidence that there was any really strong interaction either way. But in general, we do see that places where pikas have disappeared from are often places where wood rats have moved in. Probably it's just a habitat related thing where the climate's better for a wood rat now than a pika. That's something we've been able to see out in the Great Basins in some places, and it's just something that we should be keeping an eye on. And I'm glad that you guys are continuing to take those data, because pretty soon there'll be enough of those data to analyze as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Chris, do you have a favorite part of or a favorite memory from your pika field season this year?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I thought of one other thing. It says, how do they interact, affect pikas? And here's one other thing about the potential interaction with wood rats is through disease. So we have been showing that pikas that are at lower elevations tend to have more ectoparasites on them that are coming from rodents like wood rats. and that they have more incidence of diseases that are rodent diseases. So that's another way that you could have what they call a parent competition between wood rats and pikas. And it looks like kind of a one-way street where pikas are getting diseases maybe from rodents and not necessarily the other way around.
Well, I am not seeing any other questions. Does anybody else have questions, or should we all let you kind of go about your evenings and for one more second?
If you are trying to think of a question or trying to think how to word it, just say so in the chat and we'll wait longer.
I'm not seeing any, so maybe we should go ahead and wrap it up.
All right.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for an amazing field season, and we hope we'll see you back next year.
Yeah.
Have a
Thanks,
good
everyone.
evening. Thank you.